The Mandela Effect. A phenomena in which a large mass of people believe that an event occurred when it did not. The term originates back in 2009 when Fiona Broome discovered that she, along with a significant number of others, believed that Nelson Mandela had died in the 1980s when he was actually alive. While the Mandela Effect can be attributed to mass false memory, many have theorized this phenomena is rooted to multiple timelines and influences from alternative realities. Is there any truth to this phenomena, or is it as unbelievable as it sounds? Join us as we uncover the truth about the Mandela Effect.
Or non-fiction. We're working again.
Woohoo!
They let us do another episode.
I'm going to ask you if you've ever heard of this before. The Mandela Effect.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
So what do you know about it?
I don't know anything about it.
That's not true.
But you can tell me about it.
What do you think it is?
It has nothing to do with Nelson Mandela.
Actually, it has a lot to do with Nelson Mandela.
It does, I know.
You're not going to say, okay, well,
I'd like you to explain it. I don't know too much about it. I just know it has to do with Nelson Mandela.
Okay, so this is it for listeners who may not be aware. This is a phenomena, an effect that refers to a situation in which a large number of people believe an event occurred when it did not. So this actually does stem from an event in which a writer named Fiona Broome originated the term the Mandela Effect in 2009, when she created a website to detail her observation of this phenomena about how she, along with a number of her friends, believed that Nelson Mandela had died during the 1980s while serving a term in prison. Of course, this was not true. The former South African president would have actually not passed away until 2013, but Broome was shocked that such a large mass of people could remember the same identical event in such detail when it never happened. So this is the origin of the Mandela Effect. Basically, mass false memory where people remember things being different from the way it actually was, or how the world tells you it went. So already, off the hop, what do you make of this?
Well, you just told me.
Which is?
You just told me about it.
Yes, I did. So what do you make of it? Like, okay, it's this collective false memory.
Yes.
So the Mandela Effect, of course, is used, it's named after this particular incident, but this is not isolated to Nelson Mandela. This is actually an example of this type of phenomena. The Mandela Effect grew along with the popularity of Broome's website, and other false memories began to emerge from people where large numbers would say certain things were largely misremembered. So I'm going to give you some examples of this.
Okay.
Maybe you've heard of some of these. A painting of Henry VIII eating a turkey leg. So no such painting has actually ever existed. There have been plenty of cartoons created in this style, but no actual oil painting of the former King Henry VIII eating a turkey leg.
Oh, why not?
Well, I guess no one wanted to deal with all that oil from the turkey or from their paints.
Okay.
Other examples include, in Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back, many people remember Darth Vader uttering the famous line, "Luke, I am your father," but he never said that in the movie. What he actually said was, "No, I am your father." Some other examples include in Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the witch says, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all?" But she doesn't. The actual line in the movie is, "Magic mirror on the wall." And one of the best examples probably comes from the Berenstain Bears.
Oh, yes, the pronunciation of the name.
That's right. So people report remembering the famous children's book series to be the Berenstain Bears, spelled S-T-E-I-N, when in actuality it is the Berenstain Bears, B-E-R-E-N-S-T-A-I-N. And I'll give you one other example.
Oh, please.
And I think we have talked about this before. There was a collective memory of a movie called Shazam that never actually existed. This was a movie that starred the actor-comedian Sinbad at some point in the 1990s, who played a genie. No actual movie starring Sinbad as a genie actually existed. Although there was a children's movie around the same time released called Kazam, starring Shaquille O'Neal as a genie.
Yes.
So these
Shazam's a comic book superhero.
Yeah, basically. So we have all these examples of the Mandela Effect. Basically, when a situation occurs where a large group of people say that the memory of an event is different from what's happening in reality. So off the hop, we're going to have to say, is this fiction or nonfiction? Well, people are claiming these memories to be one thing and the reality to be something else. Here's where the Mandela Effect gets kind of interesting. There is a theory for the basis of the Mandela Effect that relates to quantum physics and the idea of multiple realities.
Okay.
It is argued, rather than one timeline of events, alternate timelines or universes may be taking place and mixing with each other, including our timeline. This argument is outlined in an article by A. French in a 2018 article titled Correspondences, Journal for the Study of Esotericism. And this is backed up by the person who named the Mandela Effect, that aforementioned author, Fiona Broom. She is supportive of the interpretation, and on her website, she claims the differences that arise from the movement between parallel realities is based on the theory that within each universe, alternative versions of events and objects exist. A comparison that she draws upon involves the holodeck in Star Trek, about how if there's a glitch in the holodeck, some things will occur where maybe the holographic characters will start realizing this is not reality, that this is a fabricated world. Or also a similar analogy she uses is The Matrix, where Neo becomes aware that the world he's in is not real because there's a glitch in the hardware. That's the theory behind the Mandela Effect.
Okay.
You already look exasperated.
Okay, go where you're going to go with this. I'm curious.
Well, no, at this point, I mean, okay, I'm not going to deny the fact that a large group of people have assumed that the way something has been remembered is different from what actually occurred. You know, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence to that, and you can't really say anything against it. But what about this theory of alternative realities bleeding into each other, and that's the reason that people have these, how should we say, incoherent or inconcise memories?
Are you asking me if that is fiction or nonfiction?
Absolutely.
I'm going to say that is fiction because it sounds like something from a movie. And although I'm not denying that there probably are alternate realities, it doesn't really make sense with this.
Do you think people are being honest about these false memories? Because we've talked about the Berenstain Bears phenomenon, the Kazam phenomenon.
Well, another thing that makes me question this is the person that is backing it up is the person that made it up. Mm-hmm. And also their website was known for having all these crazy stories on it. So of course they're going to say yes because it's their thing. They want more people to use their site.
So there's a bias happening there.
I feel there is a bias, and I feel they've watched maybe a little bit too much Star Trek. Oh, sorry, was it Star Wars? Yes, then Chewie, not Spocky.
Well, either way, a little bit too much starry.
Yeah.
Too much starry thoughts. The idea of alternative realities, here's the thing. It's unfalsifiable. So that means there's no way to disprove that other universes don't exist. And this is what Broom and her advocates argue for. You can't disprove that this is happening, so therefore, I'm going to believe it.
That's like saying, oh, you can't disprove there's alternate realities, so this is true because I want it to be true. That's what they're saying, right?
It's, this is not a one-to-one analogy, but it's me holding up my chapstick in my hand saying, this chapstick repels tigers. There's no tigers around us, so therefore it must be true.
Oh, I got to get some of that chapstick.
Yeah, that tiger repellent. And even then, that's not a great analogy because you could still conceivably take my chapstick to the zoo, up to a tiger, and see if a tiger goes towards it or runs away. So that's still provable in one way or another, or disprovable,
Don't do that. They might bite off your fingers and then they'll choke on it.
then I won't care if it's true or not. So yeah, basically this has been the crux of the argument from Broom and her advocates, the fact that you can't disprove it. I'm going to make an argument that this is not true, that there is actual evidence to show this is false. And I'm going to go pretty deep into quantum physics.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I will say it is unfalsifiable. There's no actual notion that we have knowledge to say alternative realities don't exist. However, what scientists do know about quantum theory mechanics and just what they theorize in general about quantum mechanics does not support Broom's theory. What does support it to an extent is a 2014 paper in which a number of professors, including Howard Wiseman, Dr. Michael Hall, amongst others, argued that parallel universes may actually exist and possibly interact with each other. Rather than evolving independently, nearby worlds or, let's say, alternative realities influence one another by a subtle force of repulsion. I'm not going to get too much into the mechanics of it because it's very complex, but in very basic terms, in terms of the quantum mechanical effects, it is possible, they're theorizing in this paper, for the events of one universe to somehow, on a quantum mechanical level, affect the events of another universe. However, their theory does not support any sort of impact on the cognitive functions of sentient beings. So in other words, it's going to affect another universe in such a unnoticeable level because it's going to happen on a quantum mechanical level to an extent where a human being's mind could not process it. It's not going to affect them, and it's not going to impart anything like a false memory.
It'll just show up on the Broom's website.
It will show up on the Broom's website, that's
Yes.
right. And it's not feasible to suggest that these parallel realities can affect perceptual memory of individuals. There's nothing within the existing theory of quantum mechanics, even for those who advocate for the existence of parallel realities, to say that this would happen. So all the scientists are arguing is that quantum phenomena, again, stuff that happens on such a minute level that human beings cannot actually conceive of it, we can only theoretically and mathematically approach it. This arises from a universal force of repulsion between nearby or similar worlds. This is not an actual explanation on how this would affect human memory, or does it even suggest this would be possible? And here's the other thing. There is no evidence that it is possible for individuals, keep this in mind, to shift between realities. This is about influencing other realities. The theory Broom is talking about is that somehow there'd be leakage between parallel realities, and suddenly a group of people are exposed to a movie called Kazam, or I guess actually in the case of Broom's theory, Shazam, that doesn't exist. Yet that's not true. There's no evidence here that humans can be vessels for this, and therefore, by what we know about quantum mechanics, this is not possible. That's the very mechanical, dry explanation. Let's get to just a very quick, juicy explanation of what probably is happening.
Okay.
False memory.
Yes.
We have false memories all the time. You've probably had it. You've probably had it where you talk to your parents or your siblings about, oh, remember when this happened when we were young? And they say instead, no, what are you talking about? This happened instead. Has that ever happened to you?
I can't think of something specific, but I can think of an incident when it happened in a TV show.
Okay.
Seinfeld. There's an episode where Jerry's remembering someone from university or college. He's like, I remember very specifically because he's wearing a orange dress or something. And then he finally sees her in the present day, and she's like, no, I would never wear that color.
And that's based on that sort of anecdotal idea that people misremember stuff all the time. To put it bluntly, the Mandela Effect is very likely a case of false memories because of the way brains work. For example, most Americans learn in school that Alexander Hamilton was a founding father of the United States of America, but he was never a president. However, when people are asked about who were presidents of the United States, many people still mistakenly believe Hamilton was a president, and if we consider the neuroscience behind it, basically, and this is a very simple explanation, the part of the brain encoded to retain the memory of who's a president also contains information about Alexander Hamilton, because as people are learning in school, that's where it's stored in the brain. So therefore, when asked to recall presidents, because it's stored in a similar area of the brain, that recall happens. So people make that association. It's a very basic example of false memory, but it's one that happens. And there's also issues of confabulation. That's when your brain fills in gaps of missing information to make more sense of events. In fact, confabulation is very often a situation that will increase with age and is often attributed to victims of PTSD. There's a lot of evidence about this, and if you're wondering where you can get articles, go to windsorpubliclibrary.com and our databases. You can look up false memory. You can look up some papers on research about false memory and confabulation. In fact, the researcher Benjamin Straub articulated how misleading a post-event information can be. And I like this. Post-event information is basically where someone tells you information that affects your memory about the event. A basic example is when you notice someone driving by. Maybe you didn't notice the color of the car, but someone goes, "Did you see the blue car?" Your brain is going to be influenced to believe that was a blue car that drove by, when in fact it turns out it was a black car. But someone's misperception of it influenced your memory.
Yes, and over time, memories can change because you might misremember certain parts, and if someone's talking about it, they might misremember it, and then it influences your initial memory. So it gets a little complicated.
Exactly. Now, defenders of the alternative reality interpretation proposed by Broom, they may argue that false memory might explain some events being misremembered, but they can't account for a large group of people sharing the same incorrect memory of an event. But this isn't true. Studies have been conducted which verify that shared false memories can easily occur. I'm just going to bring up one example. It's a well-documented example from a 2010 study that examined people familiar with the clock at the Bologna Centrale railway station, which was damaged in the Bologna massacre bombing in August of 1980. In this study, 92%, almost 100% of respondents falsely remembered that the clock had remained stopped since the bombing attack, when, in fact, the clock was repaired shortly after the attack. So we have right here a very clear example where a huge group of people clearly misremembered something. This is just one of many documented cases where a large number of people shared a false memory. In fact, there's another study that confirms that incorrect information is actually quite common. There's a study conducted by a group of scientists, including N.B. Diamond, Armson, and Levine, who found that 76% of people make some type of mistake when asked to recall information. And this is why eyewitness testimony is being called into question in court cases, because there's a lot of scrutiny about how authentic and legitimate that can be used as evidence now. I have one more thing to talk about here. It's the internet. The role of the internet in influencing the memories of the masses should not be understated, because this spreading of information comes with the potential for misconceptions and falsehoods to gain traction at an unparalleled rate. In fact, people begin to create communities based around falsehoods, and what was once in the imagination or scrutinized as false now is seen as factual. All you need to do is look at large groups of communities like QAnon to see how that ends up being the case. There was a large study of over 100,000 news stories discussed across Twitter, conducted over a period of 10 years, that showed that hoaxes and rumors won out over truth every time by about 70%. That is articulated in an article from Science, an issue from 2018, and the article title is "The Spread of True and False News Online." So the speed at which false information spreads could help explain the Mandela effect at this point, especially because we were talking about how Broom perpetuated this on a website.
The internet kind of is like the game telephone that you play as a kid sometimes, where one person says something and it goes around in a circle, and by the time it gets to the end, it's nothing like the original thing.
Exactly. So for those who are thinking, well, this doesn't actually explain these instances, like why do we remember Berenstain Bears instead of Berenstain Bears? What about Nelson Mandela? Why do so many people remember him dying? I'm going to offer some explanations just to wrap up the episode quickly. The portrait of Henry VIII. I already mentioned that portrait. There was lots of cartoons of Henry VIII eating a turkey leg, but no actual painting. These are attributed to parodies. Basically, parodies become so popular that people remember the parody or they remember the take on it rather than what actually happened in the source. I think that's self-explanatory for the Henry VIII situation.
And for the Star Wars one.
And for the Star Wars, yes, because people would quote Luke, I am your father to each other across playgrounds and at work all the time because this phrase would appear in parodies. A very concrete example is in the 1995 comedy. Which one was that? Oh, shoot.
Spaceballs?
No. Oh, yes. It appeared in the 1995 comedy Black Sheep.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, where a character said, Luke, I am your father. So
Chris Farley said it.
Chris Farley said it, so it's already in the popular culture.
Actually, I'm pretty sure it was in Tommy Boy.
That was my false memory. Yes, it was Tommy Boy.
Because he says it into the fan.
That's
I
right.
only know because I watched it the other day.
So, okay, good. I'm glad you could correct my false memory.
2 movies starring the same lead actors.
Exactly.
In the 90s.
So, as you can see, there is an example of how false memory can occur in real time. Another thing, I mentioned the Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs reference. Well, in an early Looney Tunes cartoon, the character Witch Hazel says, mirror, mirror on the wall. And because, let's face it, people probably saw that cartoon more than the film Snow White because at this time, it wasn't on VHS. Home video rental wasn't really a thing, but rerun episodes of Looney Tunes cartoons were a lot more prolific. People remembered that and made the association that that was the phrase said in Snow White because of the parody. So this is an example of how these sort of misrememberings of these phrases, these misquotings, enter the popular lexicon and they spread and are falsely misattributed to taking place in the source material.
Okay.
So the Berenstain Bears, very simple to explain. Steen is a much more common ending than Stain. In fact, Mike Berenstain, the son of the creator Stan Berenstain, talked about how his father all the time would have his last name misquoted and misremembered to the extent where he shared a story with his son about how one time in school, his teacher insisted that he needed to spell his name correctly because he was spelling it incorrectly. Simply put, Stain versus Steen, one is a lot more common. People will fill in the gaps, that whole thing that we talked about where memory will fill in things. Essentially, think about how many names end with Stain versus Steen. This confusion added over the years, along with the fact that there were knockoff Berenstain Bears books with Berenstein in the title.
Oh, so there was bootlegs.
There were bootlegs. So essentially, these bootlegs helped purport the myth. So as for the titular misremembered event that gave the Mandela Effect its name, many argued that the false memories of Mandela's death could actually be a confabulation of him with another South African, Steve Biko. He was a prominent South African anti-apartheid activist who died in prison in 1977. And also keep in mind, Mandela retired from public life in 1999. The relative quiet surrounding this once very popular figure who was constantly in the news may have just made people assume he had passed, especially because when we look at when this Mandela Effect became popular and people started talking about it, that was in 2009, a decade after he had retired. So what I'm trying to say is, in all of these cases, there are very logical explanations about why people misremembered these events. There's no evidence to show that parallel universes are influencing each other on any sort of way where it's going to affect human conception and memory. So, very clearly, the Mandela Effect is fiction.
You did your research today.
I really wanted to talk about this. And of course, there are sources for this. You can feel free to check them all out through the Windsor Public Library website at windsorpubliclibrary.com.
One more fact before we go.
Yes, I love this. A random day fact.
All right. Now, everyone's familiar with the Canadian term toque. It's a winter hat you wear when it's cold, or sometimes even if it's not cold.
Our friends north of the border, I believe they call it, well, because here in Windsor, it's north of the border, they call it a beanie.
Oh, really? Anyways, here's another Canadian term. It's called the bunny hug. Now, what is a bunny hug?
That's disgusting, whatever it is.
It's not disgusting. A bunny hug is actually what they call a hoodie in Saskatchewan. Why do they call it this? Well, I pulled this from a news story because this is like a long told folk tale apparently over there. But there's some facts I'll tell you here. A century ago, there was a bunny overpopulation in Saskatchewan, and locals turned the pelts into something loosely resembling what is a hoodie today. Here's another fact. The name is rooted in a dance. The bunny hug, not to be confused with the bunny hop, was a provocative dance popularized in the early 1900s.
I knew it would be provocative.
And so, according to CTV News Regina, it confirms a lot of these things. It wasn't originally a garment. It was a dance. And but now people refer to it that way. If you go there, a lot of people will say, "Oh, did you bring your bunny hug? It's your hoodie." So there you go. Random fact, and it goes all the way back to the Eaton's catalog in 1959-1960. By the 1970s, residents across the provinces were wearing what they at least knew of as the bunny hug, which is now a part of the provincial lexicon.
Well, this is good. So I know from now on, whenever someone asks me for a bunny hug, not to ask for an adult. Dave, thank you so much for that. If you have any questions you would like to have answered on the show, please send us an email. You can send us a message to askalibrarian@windsorpubliclibrary.com. Just put fiction or nonfiction in the subject heading and let us know what questions or concerns you have about the program and what you would want us to uncover the truth of. Until then, I'm Adam.
I'm Dave.
And this has been Fiction
or Nonfiction.